Thank you, Alessandra. And I noticed we have these awesome captions today. I want to say thank you to Amanda. And do I need to turn it down, or looks like they're adjusting? Great, that's better. So I'm Marlena Compton, and today I'm here to talk to you about unleashing your inner superhero. As Alessandra mentioned, I worked at a few different places, and a lot of my expertise is in pair programming. So these are like some zines that I'm working on for pair programming. And this isn't what I'm talking about today, but I wanted to mention this because I'll be doing the expert hours or office hours or whatever. And so if you have any questions about pair programming, like getting started, or if this is something that you do at your work and there are some issues, feel free to come by and just talk to me about it. So, but today, I want to talk about superpowers. This is kind of boring, so hang on. You have to have a cape if you're going to talk about superpowers, right? Yeah. Here we go. Need a little bit of flash, right? So when we think about superpowers, we think about stuff like flying, or being able to breathe fire, or smashing things. But, you know, in real life, it is not like that. I have worked in one of these type of cubes before. Who works in a cube? Yep. And these aren't even the good, these are the short ones. So you're just out there, right? And traffic and stuff. Life is not a glittery cape. And the reality of being in test automation or testing, or even just caring about the quality of what you write, is that you're going to be arguing like this all of the time for what you're trying to do. Like, I'm guessing there are people in here who have had to argue about even being able to write tests or like maintain them. Like, if you want to maintain them, that takes time too. And so, like, we want this to be a world where good triumphs over evil, where, like, you know, the good guy always wins. But I don't know. If we just have the right colored tights, we can fix everything. So it's not like that, though. In software, usually when we think of the superhero, there's this myth of, like, the person who's going to work all weekend or all night. Maybe you know somebody like this or have this person on their team, right? They're going to fix the release. But in reality, what they do is they go home and they write 10,000 lines of code that nobody understands, and then they dump it in there and you have to fix it. That's the reality that I found. So today, what I want to do is kind of rearrange how we think about superheroes, what we think of about superheroes, and I'm going to tell 3 stories to kind of dig into this and look at these qualities and how we can use them at our jobs. So for the first story, we're going to go to my hometown, San Francisco, and talk about a little boy, Miles Scott. And Miles, when he was like 18 months, was diagnosed with leukemia, which is pretty scary because toddler is supposed to be climbing around making a mess. And Miles was battling cancer. When he reached the age of 5, this cancer went into remission. So his parents submitted to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and his wish was to fight crime with Batman. So Make-A-Wish kind of took this and ran with it, and Miles became Bat Kid. And he got to do fun things like ride in the Batmobile, and he fought the Penguin. Here he's saving the mascot for the San Francisco Giants. They gave him the key to the city, his chocolate. And this was a huge event. I don't know if people in here remember this. I was living in the city at the time, and it was on TV. Obama even sent him a message. This is 20,000 people who have come out to support Miles as the superhero. So right now, I would like for you to kind of think about, like, who is the superhero in this scenario? And we're going to come back to this particular story. But for now, we're going to go back in time to 1955. And this is a bus from Montgomery, Alabama. And this particular story has a lot to tell us about speaking truth to power. And it's actually like there's a lot happening, and it's about being the expert in the room, or in this case, on the bus. So in 1955, these buses were segregated. Like up here in the front, we see white passengers. People of color or black folks were supposed to sit in the back. And then in the middle, you see this woman here. There was this space of 2 rows where people could sit. And I call this the liminal space. So a liminal space, liminal is Latin for the word threshold. So this is any place where there could be like some change. And on these buses, in these 2 rows, this was really a gray area on the bus. And by law, black folks were entitled to sit here at any time. Unfortunately, because of racism and segregation, this was not enforced. The drivers of these buses were mean, they were vicious, they would hurl insults to people. They wouldn't just, like, it's not like they politely asked people to move from these seats. Like if these seats started to fill up, the bus driver would tell people to move to the back. So this is a liminal space. Who in here has heard of Rosa Parks? Hopefully everyone. And probably what you've heard about her was that she was this tired seamstress who did not want to move from her seat. But for this talk, to prepare for it, I actually read her biography called The Rebellious Life of Rosa Parks. And what I found is that this narrative that we have of her that kind of simplifies what she did down to one sentence is actually not true at all. Well, it's true, but it's an overly simplified narrative. And if we unpack this, I think it'll teach us a few things. So it's true that she was a seamstress who worked in a tailor shop, but she had also done many, many years of activist work for the NAACP. Just very consistent, working with youth, working with a lot of people in the Black community. And so when she protested on this bus, she knew a lot about what was happening. She was an expert. And she knew all of the work that the Black community had done to kind of try and negotiate with the civic leaders of Montgomery and also with the bus company. But the community was totally getting the runaround. And so, people would try not to ride the bus. People knew that this was a problem. People were getting fed up with this. And actually, Rosa Parks was not the first one to protest on the bus. The first person to protest, or one of the first people, was Claudette Colvin. So in this this photo, she's 14, but when she protested on the bus, she was 15 years old. And she had been learning in school about the Constitution, about freedom, and suddenly she's on this bus, and it's like, well, what's happening? And so she refused to move. She was sitting in one of those gray seats in the liminal space. And she was forcibly removed from the bus. So this is kind of an example of community traction. Like, Claudette was not successful in her protests. Like, the buses, the Black community avoided them for like a couple of days, but then they came back. Right? Like, there wasn't that much organization, but this kind of primed the community because everyone at this point is frustrated and they know that she's done this. Rosa Parks rarely took the bus. So people didn't want to ride the bus because it's a horrible experience. You're going to get insulted. Maybe the bus just won't even stop for you. That happened too. And so on this particular day in December of 1955, she didn't want to take the bus, but she was doing that second shift. So anybody in here who's underrepresented in tech knows about the second shift, right? Like, you do your tech job and whatever, but then you're also having to like teach people about diversity to make the space for yourself to exist. And Rosa Parks was kind of doing the same thing. And so she was planning to go do an NAACP work after her full day of doing tailoring at her job. And so she was tired. She got on the bus and she sat in that middle seat. But when she was asked to move on this particular day, everything kind of came together. So she's sitting in this middle seat. She's the expert, right? Like, I think it's fair to say she was an expert activist. And if we look at this photo, do we see somebody who's like tired and down and whatever? When I look at this photo, I see somebody who is young and vibrant, who's meticulous. She was meticulous in everything that she did. So in this one particular moment, she had a full understanding of the frustration in her community. She knew, like, that people had been trying to negotiate with the city, wasn't working. And she's like, you know what? I'm done. I'm just done. And so she wouldn't move. And once they arrested her and took her into the police station, it sent enough of a shockwave through her community that the leaders in the Black community got together and organized a massive protest. So let's look at some of the elements of what happened. So we had this community traction. People were fed up. We had this like area on the bus where it was possible to sort of like play with us, where you had a right to sit, but it wasn't being enforced. And we had our hero. So I'm saying hero, but actually she had quite a lot of expertise and she knew exactly what was going on. And this sort of led to this collective action. So what does this mean at our jobs? I put this picture of a beach here, and I want you to kind of like sit and enjoy it because we're going to dive back in just a minute. But think about like in testing and test automation, liminal space, right? Like we have our conference rooms where different teams come together or different groups, and you're talking about how to make decisions. And this is why like a lot of team offsites, they take place at somewhere where people don't have a lot of ownership, because this is where it's like things are in flux a little more. Community traction. So at work, it's important to think about like how big is the impact? Like if you're trying to argue for something that hasn't affected a lot of people, you're probably not gonna get very far if you want something big to happen. And how much frustration is there? This kind of intersection of like something that's creating a big impact and something that is really frustrating. This is when you can get a large collective action. So let's move on to our third story. For the third story, we're going to go to South Carolina. It's 2015. Obama is still president. Hillary's getting ready to run. Donald Trump is a joke. He's still a joke. And it's Wednesday, middle of the week, Wednesday, June 15th. A white supremacist walked into this church, Emmanuel AME in Charleston, during the evening prayer service. And if you go to church, Wednesday prayer service is usually a pretty big deal. And he started shooting. And he killed 9 people, including South Carolina State Senator Clementa Pinckney. So this is so bad, I couldn't really figure out what to do for this slide. And I'm just going to take this off for a minute, because I don't want to trivialize this. In the days that followed, the white supremacist was shown posing with the Confederate flag. And I'll give you the content warning now, because you're going to see this flag in a minute. If it disturbs you, I don't blame you at all, if it's not the kind of thing you want to look at. But the problems didn't end there. Right after these photos are emerging of this guy with a flag, and then a lot of black churches started burning all across the South. And this was arson. Like all of these were being investigated for arson. So remember, we were talking about like frustration and impact. This is like really causing people in South Carolina to reach a boiling point. And the state flag in South Carolina had quite a troubled past and is actually a racist symbol. So there was a lot of protesting happening. People were very unhappy about this. Retail stores such as Walmart and Kmart started removing this flag from their shelves. But at the state capitol, this flag was still flying. And there was a lot of debate happening. What do we do with this flag? Like, it's still flying. People are talking, and like, it's kind of, I think, indicative of the time and the frustration of people. This is like a state representative who's a Republican. He's just like, I don't know what I'm doing. So let's think about our different aspects of this. So we've got people fed up. So we have a good amount of community traction. A state flag represents so many people. And a state capitol is like, this is the place where everyone in the state should be welcome, right? So we need an expert in here. I think that it's time for the superhero. On June 27th, activist Bree Newsom climbed the flagpole and she took the flag down. She was arrested and the flag was put back up when she came down. But this kind of like helped this situation give it some air, right? Like this was what people wanted to see. And there was a crowdfunding page for her bail, which quickly reached $66,000. Writer-director Ava DuVernay called her a black superhero. I just love this drawing by Rebecca Cohen. After a week of attending funerals, the Republican governor, Nikki Haley, had the flag permanently removed. And she said about this, I think the more important part is it should have never been there. These grounds are a place that everybody should feel part of. There is a place for that flag. Nikki Haley said that. I don't think there's a place for this flag. But it's not a place that represents all people in South Carolina. So let's go back to this crowd. Remember when I asked you earlier to think about who are the heroes in this photo? They're the folks who, there's Miles, cancer survivor at 5, got to be Bat Kid. There are all of the volunteers who made this happen. There's Make-A-Wish Foundation, who got all these people to help. But then there are all the people in this crowd right here. This is 20,000 people. And this is sort of the last big point about this being a superhero is that it takes practice. And this is a practice, right? This is actually a pretty happy event. Celebrating somebody, little kid who's defeated cancer, that's a fun thing. But now there are reasons to go out and protest that are not as much fun. This is my first protest. I went to this women's march, and I had never done this before. But this actually became a kind of practice for me. Because eventually when the family separations started happening, I realized that I had hotel points and I had airline miles, and suddenly it made a trip to Tornillo, Texas a lot more feasible. And I'm not gonna lie, this was scary. I did not know what this was gonna be like. But I was fed up. This is having a pretty big impact. These are if you see back here, this is the camp where they're keeping kids that haven't been reunited. They're busing more kids in here, which is just awful. And at this point, my facade of a talk about test automation is probably totally coming unraveled because our world is coming unraveled. And pretty soon, that flaky test that you hate so much, that one that it's not actually failing when it fails every time, that flaky test is not going to matter. I'm less here to tell you also how to speak truth to power, because if you work in test automation, if you work in testing, this whole field is about speaking truth to power, right? We all have this sort of overview of the systems we work with that I think a lot of people don't necessarily get. And a lot of times we're the advocate and nobody wants to listen to us. So this is a skill that you've been honing for a long time and practicing. And my goal here is to help you kind of understand the skill that you already have and take this out to work on something larger, because we just need it so much. So I'm going to ask you for 3 things. Number 1, I need you to listen and believe much more in Black women, women of color, and underrepresented people. They're the heroes here. And they do so much work for this too. I need you to go back to work on Monday, your action item from this talk, and start giving more credit to the women on your team and make more space for them to participate. And that's going to mean maybe you stop talking a little sooner and share a bit less to give them some space. I want you to amplify their ideas and give them credit. Hey, Stacy's idea for blah, blah, blah was so awesome. Let's do it. Number 3 is that I need you to vote. I need you to vote, and I need for you to argue with your Aunt Janet or your Uncle Lester who voted for Trump, but now they're kind of on the fence because they can see what a mess it's all turning into. Like, I have a mom-in-law who does not talk to me. She voted for Trump. But my mom is voting for a Democrat this fall because I've just been chipping away at her and texting her, and she's pretty cool and she loves me. How is this real life? I don't know how this became our real life. But I'm truly grateful to the organizers of this conference for letting me come here and give this talk. And I'm grateful for every single one of you sitting here because I know you're going to leave here and you're going to do everything that you can. And we're all going to be superheroes together. Thank you.